So I would like to introduce to you Lisa Atkins. Start coming on up. Lisa is the State Land Commissioner. And for many years, Brenda Barton, Sylvia Allen, Barbara Bunton, which is over here, and Lana Markison, have been working on mostly federal land issues. And Lisa's going to tell you about the state trust lands, which are different than the Forest Service and the BLM, and how they are generating revenue from the schools on those state lands and how we maintain them. All those good things, right, Lisa?
All those good things.
All those good things. So welcome, Commissioner Atkins.
How many of you know what Proposition 123 is? Okay, let me get that off the table right now. It has nothing to do with the State Land Department. Proposition 123 is the settlement of an education lawsuit between the education community and the legislature. And it has to do with, ironic that you said something about Kimberly. She and I just had lunch yesterday.
Good.
I work very closely with the Treasurer's Office because the proceeds from our activities at the State Land Department on behalf of the beneficiaries actually are deposited in the Treasurer's Office. So since nobody was going to ask me about 123, just let me tell you it has nothing to do with the Land Department.
Okay.
So we'll move on.
All right.
I'm very happy to be, can I have the, do you mind?
You want? Oh, well, it's not really a clicker. Let's see if it works from there.
Okay. Might be easier in
But
case we have to go back.
let me see if I can get it full screen. Do you want it full screen?
That would be great.
Do you know how to do that?
No. I have 9.2 million acres, but I don't know how to work a clicker.
Yeah. And I may have to do it for you.
Okay.
Slideshow.
It's a mouse, technically.
It's a mouse.
I can't operate a mouse either. So just a little bit of background. Tom and I know each other, but I'm not sure that I really know anybody else in the room. In 1976, I worked on a congressional campaign. It was for what? Oh, perfect. It was,
Oh, well, that was good.
at that time, the state had obviously 2 United States senators, but we only
What
had.
happened?
That's good.
Just leave it alone.
Oh, there it's on. Well, it wasn't there a minute ago. Yeah.
You weren't looking at it.
All right. Okay.
But in the 70s, before the 1980 census and redistricting, the state only had 4 members of Congress, 4 members of the U.S. House of Representatives. And in 1976, both Congressional District 3, which was essentially the western half of the state, and Congressional District 4, which was the eastern half of the state, were both open seats. Congressman John Rhodes represented a great deal of Maricopa County, and Congressman Mo Udall represented almost all of southern Arizona. I had been an intern in the state legislature in 1976, working for the president of the Senate, who was a cotton farmer from Tolleson. His name was Bob Stump, and he was one of 5 primary contestants and 3 general election contestants who ran for Congress, for Congressional District 3 in 1976, and he was elected. I went to Washington with him, first as his legislative assistant for the first 2 years, and then as his chief of staff for the next 24, and served with him literally from the first day he walked into the House until his last day when he retired in 2002. And for those of you who might be familiar with his name, he passed away 6 months after he retired from Congress, so he's no longer with us. But I learned a great deal from him, and the reason was the makeup of the district. With only 4 members of Congress, the population in Arizona was much smaller, but Congressional District 3 ran from the I-17 in Maricopa County, everything west to the county boundary, all of Yuma County, all of Mojave County, all of Coconino County, all of Yavapai County. There was no La Paz County in those days, and there were only 4 members of the House and, of course, our 2 senators. So I had the unique opportunity to learn issues in Arizona. This is where I was born and raised. From the ground up, working for a member of Congress who was responsible for any of the federal lands, any of the federal laws, any of those. And it gave me a very different perspective on how this state operates from a natural resource situation. So that background, along with returning to Arizona when Congressman Stump retired, and running the County Supervisors Association, which at that time had 55 members, elected supervisors from around the state, and then working for an organization called Greater Phoenix Leadership, which is 120 of the Phoenix Valley's leading CEOs. It's where I met the governor, and he invited me to join his staff shortly after he took office 4.5 years ago, and asked if I would run the state land department. And for a girl from Arizona who knows at least the western half like the back of her hand, and certainly the Tucson area, which is where I grew up, and all of that area in Cochise and Santa Cruz County, it was like a dream come true, because I got to take 26 years of experience on land and water issues and put them to good use on behalf of the state. So the state land department is one of the original, if not the original, departments in state government. Arizona is no different than any other state in the West in that the first day of statehood, you would have no expectation that there was an account that had taxes in it to be able to fund the services that you expect as a citizen of the state. And the federal government knew that when they granted statehood to Arizona and New Mexico, both the last two continental states that came into the Union. And so we were given 10.5 million acres, similar to other states in the West, similar to New Mexico, but New Mexico and Arizona got to learn how to manage their portfolio. We refer to those lands as a portfolio, differently than the other states, because other states weren't given strict rules about how to manage the land, and some of them gave land away, some of them sold land for pennies on the dollar. So in Arizona's Enabling Act, we have very strict rules by which we have to manage the trust, as we call it. That trust still has 9.2 million acres in it after 105 years of statehood. And that's because we have very specific rules by which we have to operate. Lana, this is where it might be helpful for me to have the...
Oh, I'm Shirley, okay.
I'm Shirley. I was looking
That's
at Lana.
okay. I don't think it'll work from there. I think
Okay.
I tried it, but I can click the...
So
arrow.
here's our vision and our mission is what reflects our understanding that we have a fiduciary responsibility as a multi-generational trust to 13 specific beneficiaries in the state of Arizona to manage an asset that was given to the state for their benefit. And so our vision as the state land department, again, one of the original departments in the creation of the state, is to manage that asset professionally. And our mission is to make sure that we remember that this is a multi-generational perpetual trust. Meaning we can't do something for today's K-12 students or today's university students or any of the other beneficiaries that would disenfranchise tomorrow's beneficiaries, and vice versa. We can't hold on to something today because we know it's going to benefit K-12 students in another generation. So managing 9.2 million acres, and if I could have the next slide, please, is an honor to be able to do, but a challenge when you have less than 100 people and the lands are spread throughout the state of Arizona. This has a list of the beneficiaries, and 9 times out of 10, particularly if you have the state treasurer here, she'll talk about the trust. It's called the Permanent Land Endowment Fund. So when we sell a piece of property or we get mineral royalties, it goes to the treasurer's office, and that fund is supposed to be invested, and the beneficiaries are given part of the earnings every year as part of their funding stream. That fund is now north of $6 billion, and that reflects the sale of land and mineral royalties from lands that belong to the trust. Kate, yes ma'am.
How much of that $6 billion is the legislature allowed to touch each year?
None of the $6 billion, none of the principal. The beneficiaries are given a percentage, a rolling percentage, like 2.5% of the earnings made from investing that $6 billion. So it's not a static fund. There's the Board of Investment from the State Treasurer's Office invest that money, and the beneficiaries are given a certain amount every year. Generally, it's 2.5%. And that's a revenue stream that goes into K-12, it goes into the 3 universities, which if you go to the, how many U of A grads do I have here? Oh, there's just a handful of us. How many ASU grads do we have here? You went to both?
ASU grad?
Yeah. And a U of A?
No, not ASU, your hand twice.
Okay.
I noticed
that
that
too,
too, but I didn't graduate.
And what about Northern Arizona University? Good. All 3 of the universities are also beneficiaries. And in the portfolio of land and assets that we manage, the 9.2 million acres that's left, the land belongs to the beneficiaries, not as a group, but as individuals. So I can go into our system, you can go into our system, and look at any piece of state trust land and know exactly who the beneficiary is. It could be K-12, it could be the School for the Deaf and Blind. Yes, sir.
Is the money that comes out of this here that goes to the schools, is that counted in the total amount that the state provides for K through 12, say, education?
It's outside of the general fund
It's
appropriations.
outside, okay.
Right, but it is part, we know how much money goes to K-12. Just like we know how much money goes to the universities, goes to the School for the Deaf and Blind, goes to the Pioneers Home. So there are 13 beneficiaries altogether. And so generally you hear the land department and people who are aware of the trust talk about K-12 because 85% of the land in the portfolio actually belongs to K-12. And I don't mean that we have 9.2 million acres that we divide on a sliding scale. We know exactly where their acreage is. And it's important for 2 reasons. One, if we sell a piece of property for, say, a commercial purpose, or what we're going to do in Eager soon, we're in the process of annexing a section of state trust land into the town of Eager. That money will, whatever development is done on that piece of property is going to accrue to the benefit of whomever the beneficiary is. So it could be the School for the Deaf and Blind, it could be the Pioneers Home. And one of my very first visits to the beneficiaries was to the Pioneers Home in Prescott. And they have a very small holding within the portfolio. They're a small agency. It started out as the Disabled Miners Home and has since been expanded to include the Pioneers Home. And the director was astute enough about his asset in the trust that he wanted to make sure that we were taking every opportunity to lease those lands if they weren't ready for sale. There was no one who was interested in buying lands that belonged to that portion of the portfolio that revenues go to the Pioneers Home. He wanted to make sure that we were actively leasing that land because he was astute enough to know that those lease payments that come in every month, whether for a farm lease, an ag lease, or a grazing lease, are revenues that actually go directly to the beneficiary every month. So there he is supporting a group of senior citizens who are on fixed income, probably Medicare and Medicaid, and he's providing them services according to their tenure at the Pioneers Home. And he knew that that revenue stream that we might be creating for him or for the Pioneers Home, leasing their land, would be something that would offset his budget challenges. So the beneficiaries are very well aware of what their asset is, even when it's as big as 8.5 million acres that falls under the umbrella of K-12. Shirley, can I have the next slide? Can you all see? Am I blocking your view?
No.
Okay.
Oh,
I choose to look at the department as an economic development opportunity for the state of Arizona, not a land department. And here's the reason why. And this is something that you all will appreciate. There's only about 13 or 14% of the entire land base in the state of Arizona that is privately owned. And I don't know about you, but I was raised to understand that the backbone of a successful economy is not the government, but it's the private sector. So that private land is what generates the revenues for our economy and keeps things going. The trust, the 9.2 million acres in the trust that the land department manages, is about 13% of the entire land base of the state. If you aggregated all of it, it would be larger than Maricopa County. When you aggregate all of it, it's larger than the country of Turkey. It's a lot of land. Besides those 2 categories, privately owned land and the land in the trust, Everything else in the state of Arizona is either owned or managed by the federal government. That's what gets me to that phrase about a successful economy and needing private property to generate a successful economy. And so we manage in all four corners. Every county has state trust land in it. Some of it is concentrated, most of it isn't. It's like every other section. We own the trust owns a section of land, and it may be a private section of land next to it. Or the Bureau of Land Management may be managing something, or the Forest Service. But when land is ready to go to market, wherever it is, and generally it's in an urban area, it's our responsibility to sell it. And there is a very specific process about how one goes about selling trust land. Somebody has to file an application. We put that application through the department. We appraise it. It goes to auction. Nobody can buy a piece of state trust land that has not been appraised, so the trust is always sure of getting fair market value, and nobody can walk in and put a check on the table and say, I want to buy this. You literally have to go to auction. Sometimes those auctions only result in one or two people bidding. Sometimes, as occurred about a year ago, we had 6 housing developers bid and drive up an auction that we thought maybe would get just the appraised value of $52 million. They drove it up north of $70 million. And all of that money goes to the permanent fund in the treasurer's office to be invested. So I always like to talk about what we do to help the economy, and these are the numbers of the millions of dollars that we have raised for the trust based on the sales of land. Cabazon is up in the Desert Ridge area. The Desert Ridge area, which was a place that kids when I was young might have gone to do things that we didn't want our parents to know about, is now the most valuable land in the entire portfolio, and that's that land on the 101 in Scottsdale Road. So that gives you an idea of what our auctions were for the last year. Now remember, this is a state agency managing a portfolio of 13% of the land base with no zoning capacity and no dollars for infrastructure. So this is raw land that we anticipate will turn into something. People don't buy land just to sit on it. Next, please. One of the reasons that we can see such high numbers is that I have 3 alignment tasks that we do at the land department. The first thing is we align the interests of the trust wherever we have a footprint. So it would be senseless for us to head in one direction when the city of Scottsdale and Phoenix were heading in another, or Tempe, or any place where we have a footprint. So we have a very close working relationship with where we have a footprint. It is particularly important to us right now because in Pinal County, which is the next growth area east of Mesa, the trust owns 37% of all the land in Pinal County. So it's important for us to understand what the residents and the elected officials in Pinal County have in mind, want to plan for their future. It would be senseless for us to open a dump in the middle of a residential area. You avoid those kind of fiascos when you actually talk to your neighbors. The second alignment we do is the one that I talked about a minute ago, and that is making sure that we never disenfranchise one generation or favor one generation over another. And that's not always easy to do. It means that you're thinking way out in the future, that we're not going to do something today to disenfranchise tomorrow. And then the third one is that we align ourselves with the public policies of the state, which serve us very well at the department for 2 reasons that I'm very fond of. One is that this state has spoken quite loudly on its support for private property, and you did so at the ballot several years ago. And also at the ballot, you approved land exchanges for the purposes of maintaining the military installations in the state of Arizona. Military happens to be the largest employer in the state, and it's for the most part a revenue stream of income to the state that is that it doesn't fall because of the recession. So we look for ways that we can actively increase the value of state trust land on a regular basis, and one of them is, in the alignment of our interests with someone else's, is what we call a zoning bank. So we now work with communities ahead of time before we have an application for a sale and get the zoning all all decided, not acre for acre, but for areas, so that when we go to auction, it attracts a variety of bidders. In the old days, you would have a piece of land that you would take to market, and it would only be good for an office building or residential. Now we work with cities, particularly Scottsdale and Phoenix, to come up with a variety of those zoning options, so that we get a variety of people who come to the auction. Because the more people at the auction who are interested in buying the land, the more money for the permanent fund for the beneficiaries. We know the value of that because we had a piece of property in Scottsdale that we assumed was going to go for a business, an office building, and it was so attractive that, and Scottsdale was very happy with us. We had agreed to put enough room in the zoning bank to accommodate automobile sales. And as a matter of fact, an auto dealer bought the property. Auto dealerships for a local community are like gold because the tax revenues are really, really good. So Scottsdale was very happy for us, very happy for them, and it proved our point about reducing the time that one would have to go to a city council to get zoning and do it at the auction. We get a higher price, the customer gets a shorter time frame to actually start building their buildings. Next, please. When you have 9.2 million acres of land, only a small portion of it, relatively speaking, is going to be land that is within the path of development. We actually have 8.5 million acres of the 9.2 that would be considered not ready for prime time. So we have to manage it. It's the same with state land as it is with any other land. If you don't take care of it today, you're not going to have it tomorrow. So we have a variety of things that we do to manage lands where it's appropriate. And these are generally intermingled lands. We have grazing allotments because it's a way to manage the land. We have ag leases. We have some recreational areas. We have an off-road vehicle area outside of Gold Canyon, but it taxes our resources. When you have 8.5 million acres that are sprinkled all over the state, and you only have 5 guys that are out on the road taking care of that 8.5 million acres, I know for a fact that half of their time is spent behind the wheel. So we build partnerships. We build partnerships with Game and Fish, we build partnerships with the state parks, and we build partnerships with other landowners in the area. Next, please. How many of you remember the fire in Yarnell?
Yeah.
I am very sad to tell you that that land was state trust land where those firefighters passed away. It is a classic example of why I was delighted that the governor asked me to join the team and run the land department, because several of the ranchers in that area are personal friends of mine who had for years been concerned about the overgrowth that was going on and that there would be a disaster one day. And I don't think any of them, we lost a couple ranches in a different fire, but I don't think any of us could imagine what was going to happen when Yarnell got to fire. So it is of particular interest to me for that reason. A, it's good for the resource, but B, we certainly need to make sure that we're not contributing to people's danger, is that we consistently manage state trust land. It is very difficult to do when you have 8.5 million rural acres spread throughout the state, but we do our best to come up with partnerships. We work very closely with the Department of Fire and Forest Management. We have 177,000 acres of forested lands, but there are firefighters. They used to be in the department, now they're their own department, and they work with us very closely. We also work very closely with the Natural Resource Conservation Districts, NRCDs, which originally were created during the Dust Bowl by the federal government, the Soil Conservation Service, and it's a political subdivision of the state that still exists today, and they're wonderful partners in managing state trust land. Next, please. Oh my gosh. If you would have told me that I was going to have to learn about GIS 5 years ago, I would have told you, just write it down and let me know. But I am amazed at the amount of data that we have in the land department that explains the asset that we have. But more importantly than that, and I just spoke to the Arizona Geographic Information Council meeting with like 300 or 400 people from all over the state, what GIS services do define our resources. It is an amazing group of people, and I'm very proud that they're headquartered at the State Land Department. It is a responsibility of the Land Department that's in state statute, and it's a tool that informs your local governments, my operation of the State Land Department, and several other things. And we should be very happy that we have a talented group of young people who understand this. But it is amazing. I know more about the portfolio from sitting in our building than I would ever be able to learn if I was out on the ground. That's how wonderful this information is. Next, please. Minerals. If we have subsurface minerals, copper, that is an asset that belongs to the trust. When you mine copper in the state of Arizona, you pay a royalty to the state, and that royalty belongs to the beneficiaries. And that's part of the $6 billion that's in the permanent fund in the treasurer's office. And that map shows you where the various minerals are. So we have minerals all over. As a matter of fact, the reason I'm late is because I was working on a project that involves helium. How many of you know that we have helium in the state of Arizona? Yeah, well, it's a hot commodity right now, so there's a lot of people who are interested in filing mining applications for it. And I was working on a project before I left, which made me a few minutes late. That's a lot of money to go into the permanent fund. $6 million. 16 over the last 2 years. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry to bother you.
You're not bothering me.
All of my life, helium has been used for balloons to make them rise. So how do you keep helium in the ground and not rise?
It has to do with the geology. But while it's important to you for a balloon, it's far more important as a material that is critical to defense. It is a defense stockpile matter, and if you follow helium, there's a shortage of it right now. We don't have a lot in the state of Arizona, and luckily most of it's under state trust land, so the commodity prices for it are pretty high right now.
It still rises, doesn't it?
Yes,
So how does it not get between the crevices and cracks in the land and escape out into the air?
it might,
Oh, okay,
it might.
okay.
But the fact that it's there and can be mined means that the geologic formation keeps it contained.
Thank
You
you.
have to drill a well, just like you would for oil.
Thank you.
But it's really, it's not in shortage, but there's not enough of it right now.
Where is it? Is it concentrated in one area?
It's
of
in the
state?
north, it's in Navajo and Apache County.
There is state land trust within the reservations?
No, but there is state trust land that has helium deposits on it. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's on the reservation, but there are known quantities of helium that you can, that are underneath state trust land. And there are also known quantities that are underneath lands that are managed by the federal government, like the Petrified National Forest. So if it's a subsurface mineral and helium is considered a mineral, we have the opportunity to approve mining applications for that substance to be mined, as we would gold or copper or any other hard rock. Yes, sir.
Are there any natural resources in Gila County? I don't see any.
There might not be mines, so that's those are all mineral sites,
Oh, I see.
but there might be others. Next, please. That is our operational revenue stream. Permanent receipts, which is money that comes from the sale of land, not the leasing of land, but the sale of land, or mineral exploration is known as a permanent receipt, and it goes to the treasurer's office for deposit in the permanent fund. Expendable receipts are lease payments, so if you are grazing on state trust land, you pay us to do that. It's a lease that you have, you don't have a right, you have a lease agreement. Those receipts are paid to the department and are then given to the beneficiaries. So we have a revenue stream. They actually come in and we make sure that they're paid and up to date, and then we send them on to the beneficiaries. And fee revenue is for a variety of things, including the $15 that you need to pay us for the ability to be able to go on state trust land. State trust land is not public land. You do not have a right to use it without permission. So if you want to use state trust land for sightseeing or hiking or something else, you actually have to buy a permit, and you can do that online, and it's $15. Next, please. One of the things that the governor has asked all of the cabinet, not asked, is a part of our operations statewide, is to go through, and for those of you who know the term Six Sigma or Lean, that's what the Arizona Management System is. We brought in a gentleman by the name of John Bernard, who literally met with the cabinet members, that would be all of the agency directors, every Friday for the first 3 or 4 months that we were in office, to get us to go through and streamline our operations, and no department has been immune from that, including the State Land Department. For me, it was even more important because in today's world where things are done electronically, I had 100 years of paper because that's how all the transactions were done. It's slow, they can burn, we spent an enormous amount of money digitizing them, and for the first time in the history of the department, we have all of our applications online. So we're very proud of having participated in this. It's an ongoing situation. You just don't do it once and say we did it and move on. It's continuous improvement every day. Next, please. I think that speaks for itself. If you are in business and you have a time frame by which you have to establish your operations, you really don't want for a state agency to drag their feet to get it done. So this is an example of what we did in the mineral section to reduce application volume and as well as get the applications through. So in a volatile market like helium is right now, you don't want your application to be sitting around for somebody to think about it for 6 or 8 months because the market could hit a high and immediately tank. So we're sensitive to what our customers are going through.
Ready?
Ready. We have metrics that we send to the governor's office on a monthly basis that track exactly what we're doing. Red for you got a big problem on your hands, yellow we're starting to climb out of the problem, green for you met your goals. I don't like to see very much green because if you reach the pinnacle, sometimes you just sit there and look around you. I'd rather know that we're continuously trying to improve everything we do at the department. So we're in much better shape than when the governor took office. And we actually have a reporting system. So at any time I can look at those reports and know exactly where we are in any section of the department and where our revenues are. And if somebody's got a problem, if we have a challenge in one of our processes. We recently assisted the governor's office in fulfilling his commitment to the state about making sure that broadband would be available in every community. In fact, I think this was one of the communities that drove that decision. And I'm happy to say that the land department, who usually can be pretty cantankerous when it comes to rights-of-way, and having somebody and issuing a rights-of-way, we broke records and have a particular process that is specifically designed to assist broadband so that we can be part of the progress in getting broadband to every corner of the state. And I'm really proud of that. Next, please. And that is, you can't cross state trust land without getting permission, so you can't drive a utility line or anything else. And it became quite a bottleneck. So it's one of our success stories, and it's much better than it was. I still think we can do better, but rights of way affect gas companies, utilities, the ADOT. We don't give anything away, so ADOT has to come and get a right of way from us to build a new highway, all of that. Next, please. This is just an internal of how to get mineral exploration permits done. This is just an internal control of where all of our major projects are. We, because of the cyclical nature of the real estate business, we contract out a lot of our activities because it's crazy to have somebody sitting for 2 years when there's not a market. So this is how we do our accounting for contracting out for professional services. Next. How we cleaned up the backlog in minerals. And you can't read that, so I'll get you the copy if you want. And so this is my last slide, saying that I think on behalf of the almost 100 people that are employed at the State Land Department, we are doing our very best to make sure that you are comfortable that an asset that was given to the state at statehood, specifically to generate revenue for the beneficiaries, is under good management throughout the entire state. And with that, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions. Yes, sir? Yes.
Did I miss your discussion of payment in lieu of taxes?
There is no payment in lieu of taxes. That's a federal program.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. We're different from the feds. Thank heavens. Yes, sir.
Who determined who the beneficiaries would be?
They were determined when Arizona became a state, and they're fairly consistent with other states at statehood. K-12, obviously, it's a public responsibility. So K-12 is, in fact, if you look at all the state land departments that still have portfolios, we have a common theme, and that is that we provide a revenue stream for education.
But there are some beneficiaries who did not exist at the time of statehood.
No, that's not true.
Oh, really?
Yes. So I can tell you this because I know you will not reach across the table and hit me. I have your word and I have witnesses. So if you go into the beneficiaries list, you will see the University of Arizona, which was a land grant college. You will see the University of Arizona School of Mining, which was part of that land grant. And you will see 2 normal schools. Now, you could be talking to a woman who graduated from the U of A, who is very proud that the U of A is a named beneficiary. And I like to point out that the other 2 universities are listed as normal schools, but you and I both know that they're no longer teachers' colleges. That's what teachers' colleges were in the old days. They are Arizona State University and Northern Arizona University.
Okay. Another question.
Every one of those beneficiaries, with the modification of the Pioneers Home to be included with the Disabled Miners Hospital, which was in fact open and operating, because mining at statehood was a very big business, are functions of the state. We're functions of the state.
Okay. On the sale of land, is there an annual quota of the number of acres you'll put
No.
up for sale? Then
No.
who makes that determination?
I do, for 2 ways. So you can imagine if you were given an asset that was specifically designed to be scattered throughout the entire state, and what this state looked like. I mean, at one time Prescott was the state capital. Tucson was the state capital. Now it's Phoenix. So the portfolio design is such that the lands are scattered throughout the entire state in order to be able to take advantage of whichever way development and growth in the state of Arizona happen. So we have trust lands in all 15 counties, including La Paz.
So your decision is based on,
Our decision is based on whether or not we believe it is the right time to sell a piece of property, and whether or not I can take land to market as well. So if I have a piece of land that somebody has leapfrogged, and I know that there's a market out there, the market says that there are going to be buyers it's quite a process to appraise and get something ready to take to auction. So I'm not going to take land to auction just for the heck of it. But I have the ability to take land to auction myself. I can be the applicant. But we have a number of people who come in and apply for land. So we have robust sales in Maricopa, Pinal, and Pima County, which are the growth areas of the state. But we also have robust activity in places that are not in that central hub. Economic development happens everywhere in all 15 counties of the state, and I'm very serious about that.
is there land adjacent to the town of Payson?
I don't know. No. I don't think so. I think you're surrounded by forest land.
Yeah.
If there is, it may be one section or so, but it's not huge.
And raise your hands because we've got Jim giving the mic over on that side, and I've got the mic over here.
It's on.
Oh, it's on, okay.
And we alternate from side to side. Go ahead.
When the state lands were selected, how was it actually done?
They weren't selected.
So.
There is a
it was the
formula.
sections?
Yes,
Yeah, but so.
in township, range, and section. And
so-
it was consistent all the way across the board, so every township, range, and section has got lands. Now, we have picked up land since then from the BLM. There was a period of time where the land department could exchange land with the Bureau of Land Management, which I had spent several years working on. Because when we own a section of land and the BLM owns a section of land, or it's privately owned, or the Forest Service does, you cannot manage it. And we manage our land so that at some point in the future, it's going to go for a use. It's not always going to be held publicly. That's what the trust is all about. BLM doesn't do that, and certainly the Forest Service and the Park Service doesn't do that. So there have been opportunities for us to unblock lands that were every other section, every other township, and it was wonderful. Unfortunately, in the 80s, the courts determined that we did not have the authority to do that, so I have no ability to exchange land for management purposes, except in the case of protecting a military institution, one of the bases. And it's so complex and requires going to the voters twice that, oh, by the way, I have several other jobs as the state land commissioner. I'm also the co-chairman of the Governor's Military Affairs Commission. I am also on the Water Protection Fund. I'm on the Oil and Gas Commission Board. I am on the State Parks Board. I am on and the commissioner for the Natural Resource Conservation Districts, all 36 of them.
I thought you
in
didn't
the
have
state.
enough to do.
I don't have enough to do. I'm looking for something else to do. But those all stem from statehood when the land department had responsibility for all those activities. So those are legacy opportunities for me.
So you have no ability right now to exchange lands
No.
at all?
The best I can hope for is that the Congress will enact in lieu legislation, which would allow me, in fact, that's the conversation I'm going to have with the U.S. Park Service over the petrified forest, is to be able to go select lands. Thank heavens that is not my phone. I usually forget to turn mine off, so I'm glad it was Shirley's and not mine. I would be able to go select lands in lieu. So we have a bunch of state trust land that still have not been resolved in the Navajo Hopi relocation that was done in the 90s. And never did I think that work that I did in the 80s and the 90s as a chief of staff to a member of Congress, I'd still be dealing with today as the state land commissioner. So, yeah.
Okay, was there another, okay. Here you go.
Hi.
That's
Couple
Tim.
of questions. When you manage land or any of these forests, I'm kind of new to this area and I hear the arguments about forestry being destroyed around here 20, 30 years ago. And then the second thing is, well, how many times you've been sued over something like that? Second thing is...
I get sued on a regular basis.
Oh, good.
I've now become immune to an attorney showing up with a notice of claim.
Goodness gracious.
I know. I never thought I would live that long.
Yeah. Second thing is, how many times have we trespassed on your land
Oh.
without knowing it?
I'm not going to tell you. I know. No, I
So
don't.
what do I owe you?
Well, you owe me at least the opportunity to go online to the State Land Department website and buy a very reasonably priced permit that will be good for a year, and then I know that you're such a good citizen, you'll renew it at the end of that year.
Okay.
And it's merely
What
$15.
State Department? Why don't you give that?
azland.gov, www.azland.gov, and you will see a map on there that shows you, if you ever see and I apologize, it's normally on there. I have all the land uses. I have the Forest Service, I have the BLM, I have the tribal, I have the military reservations, private land, and state trust land. If you ever see a map with land ownership, state land is always blue.
That's checkerboard.
Yeah, because we're checkerboarded. Yeah.
Okay, well, I have a question if no one else has their hand raised. Somewhere in the ballpark of, I'm guessing, 6 to 8 years ago, the city of Maricopa was trying to get state land, trust land, purchased for a switching station for the
I
railroad
can answer that.
down there. Go ahead, tell us about it.
So,
Fell apart, I think, didn't it?
no, I merely moved it.
Oh, okay.
It's amazing what a girl with 9.2 million acres can do. So 2 commissioners before me, in the height of the building, when the economy was really good before it just crashed, to me, when somebody says that they do process improvement or they improve their transportation, I always think of smaller and faster. If you are around UP or Santa Fe Railroad, don't ever make that mistake. It actually means longer train cars. And so if you have an established terminal in Tucson and Phoenix, you have to have some place to be able to move the product from one point to the other and from one train to another, because some of it was coming from California, some of it was coming from Texas. So the railroads, who are the only entity that I am aware of in the United States that can condemn state trust land, and it goes back historically to the railroads' beginnings in this country, had identified a very flat piece of land across from Picacho Peak. For those of you who are aware of where Picacho Peak is, on the east side of the freeway, there is a very flat piece of property that already has railroad tracks. And UP had decided that and only that location was where they wanted to put a switching station, because they couldn't modify their operations in Tucson or Phoenix, because both of those operations are now in very urbanized area. So they couldn't tear them down and make them accommodate longer train cars. And this is the place where they were going to switch out, hence the switching station. And the land department, 2 commissioners before me, got very upset about that, because the railroads can basically come in and condemn your asset to do that. It would have meant less money for the trust, but more importantly, it would have destroyed our ability to do any development in that area, and we owned everything on both sides of the freeway and way east of there. So as Tucson and Marana grow, that area is going to grow also. So I asked them to come in. It was beyond the growth period where they needed to move product from Texas and California up north to meet the demands of building in Phoenix. They agreed to allow us to take an opportunity to look at another site. We knew what they wanted. They wanted wide open spaces. It was not going to be an intermodal destination, as some people thought it was going to be. It merely was going to be what they said it was going to be. They were going to be able to switch train cars in order to move product. And we have in fact found another location, which I'm not at liberty to discuss. I have been in conversations with them for the last 3 years. It is an ongoing conversation. Both parties, meaning the trust, that now has an opportunity to be prepared for development in that area. And UP is very happy that we found them another site, and when they get closer to a time when they need that switch station, we will make sure that it gets built.
Nice, okay.
So I solved 2 problems.
Pretty good.
Yeah. Just a girl with 9.2 million acres. Yes, ma'am.
I have a few questions, maybe 2 or 3. If that's all
Absolutely.
right.
I'm not going anywhere. The dogs have been fed, and I don't have a meeting until 8 o'clock in the morning.
I missed in the beginning who gave the state the 10 million.
10.5 million acres?
Yeah.
The federal government did.
The federal government. So I guess, why do they own 75% of our state?
So those acres went to the land department for the state to be able to manage for a revenue stream. There was already private property in the state of Arizona, and everything else there was no real Forest Service or Park Service yet, but they were lands that were managed by the federal government. Bureau of Land Management is one who probably had more management responsibility. It was the old General Land Office. But over time, the Grand Canyon Park was established. The forests were all established. We have some of the oldest forests in the Southwest, and those were done on federal lands. So it shows the progression of land ownership within the boundaries of the state, if you go back to statehood. So we actually were very fortunate.
So the state only has 13% privately owned in the whole state.
13 or 14% of the land in the state is privately owned.
So, I mean, that makes it pretty hard for the state to maintain low property taxes then, out of however many, I don't know how many million are here, but, I mean, what does the federal government do? You know,
There is a-
supposedly they manage it, but I mean, we've got fires burning up our forests here through BLM and Forest Service management, mismanagement, I should say.
That is a discussion that I am no longer equipped to have, because there have been a lot of things that have happened in the last 5 or 6 years. But I can tell you that revenue stream from property taxes is a local decision. But there is an opportunity for all of our counties to have payment in lieu of taxes when there are federal installations, whether it's a BLM office or a military installation. The federal government does make payments to the counties called payment in lieu of taxes. Now, we have far more federal land in Arizona that can be accommodated by those PILT payments, but at least there's some revenue stream from the federal government that recognizes. We have an awful lot of not just federal assets and federal land in the state of Arizona, but it's also restricted in how you can use it.
Right.
So there is a revenue stream, payment in lieu of taxes,
Okay.
but it doesn't come anywhere near to offsetting the taxes that are reflected by that ownership.
Right, and I just have 2 more, hold on.
Okay.
What about the 25,000 acres that Bill Gates bought over there in the west side, west of Phoenix?
None of those were state trust land acres, but we do have acres adjacent to that area. And those acres, if that land is ever developed, will be impacted by that development.
Yeah, because
For
he wants to
instance-
build a smart city.
Right.
Water, electricity, how is that all going to be
He
sustainable?
can't build unless he can prove that those things are sustainable. But I will tell you that the trust will benefit because the entrance to that land off the interstate happens to be on state trust land.
But will the state benefit? And then that was the
Well,
last question is,
this-
what about water availability, the
this-
way Arizona is growing? I mean, where is our water coming from besides the Colorado River to keep growing to millions of people and businesses and everything?
So let's get back to the tax question first. The local governments, my understanding is that the plan is to create a new city for that, smart city. So there will be a revenue stream from taxes like we all pay for property taxes and that. I don't think that they will be allowed to develop if they can't prove that they have water, and no place can. You can't do that in the state of Arizona anymore. Well, you can move water in this state. It's not all groundwater that's consumed. You can move water from point A to point B, and that's been proven because we take water off the Colorado River and send it in a 336-mile canal that serves Maricopa Canal and Pima County.
But it would be a massive use of water if he's allowed to do that.
Well,
It might be, and the concept of a smart city may also include recycling water. No, and I am only an expert on water for the following reason. In my spare time, I am an elected board member of the Central Arizona Project Board and happen to be the president. So unfortunately, I know that one a little too well. But we have very strict rules in the state of Arizona about how we use groundwater. And we are using as much water today with a population that is significantly larger than we were using in 1957.
Because it's not agricultural as much?
Not necessarily, and you don't want to throw ag under the bus because...
I'm not trying to throw it
No,
out.
but just as a general caution, agriculture actually reinforces the groundwater tables because you're recycling that water through the plants. And I know a lot of people, when they first come to Arizona and drive by and see all these flooded ag fields, if you look at it from the standpoint that that's the precursor, potentially, in the West Valley where I grew up, that's a precursor to development, what they were doing through agriculture was actually reinforcing the groundwater tables.
Yeah.
So it's an important part of the water cycle, but the fact that we have learned how to conserve water in a fairly lengthy, almost as old as I am in that time frame, that we still use the same amount of water today as we did when I was 4, so now you know how old I am, is remarkable considering that our population is probably 10 times what it was. So we're very inventive. At a time when California was taking Colorado River water that belonged to the state of Arizona off the river because we couldn't do anything with it, we invented groundwater replenishment. So we literally take every drop of water, whether it's the three counties, or the Colorado River Indian Tribe, or the farmers in Yuma and Mojave County, and put all that to beneficial use. And a lot of it is stored. And it was learning those lessons of how to harness storage of water that kept us from having a drought declaration on the Colorado River last year. Yeah, it is amazing to go back and look at the history of the state when it comes to water. And quite honestly, it was based on early businessmen like Carl Hayden and Paul Fannin who wanted to see this state grow, and they watched the pattern of where the Native American tribes moved from one point to another, and how they harnessed water, and how they sent it where they needed, and where they would dig wells. So it is a fascinating history that a lot of people turn on the tap and never think about. Except for my water softener guy who swears he can tell me whether or not the water that I'm drinking out of my tap is CAP water or Phoenix water. I said, you might want to know who you're talking to. That is not the truth. So.
Thank you.
Okay, so here's Bill.
I asked you about Pulse earlier, and you said that's not relevant, and you just spent a few minutes discussing it, and so I feel since you discussed it, I can discuss it.
Okay.
Does
I misunderstood you. I'm sorry.
Does PILT pay us what would otherwise be received sponsored courses, or is it under, how do you say it?
It's a formula. So I know I have an acre of federal land, and in that county, I would be responsible for so many dollars for that acre. And based on the formula, because PILT payments go to every state that has federal land to offset the impact of having federal lands, and I apologize for missing your point.
Are PILT payments competitive, is my question. Are they
No.
fair? They're not.
No,
They're not.
it is a formula-driven process based on an appropriation that's given by the Congress, and they have never, in my lifetime, appropriated enough
Okay.
money to give to every local county government in Arizona, at least in Arizona, to accurately reflect the tax revenue that's being lost because it can't be developed.
The second thing I want to say is whatever they pay you, it is not enough. You are amazing asset.
Can you go home with me tonight? Or can I give you the governor's cell phone number? I have about 97 colleagues in the department that would like for somebody else to tell them that I'm worth having around. You're the nicest guy in the room. I love it.
Is there another question? Here's Jean. Jean has a question.
You have 177,000 acres of forest land.
Yes.
How are you protecting and saving the forest?
The bulk of those acreages actually are managed by NAU School of Forestry, and it's the Centennial Forest. So NAU, like the University of Arizona and Arizona State University, are both beneficiaries. The land actually belongs in the portfolio of the University of Arizona. But Wally Covington, who's been at NAU for decades and may have retired, but Wally Covington started years ago, and I want to say it was in the late 70s, early 80s, of doing research on how to control bark beetle, on what to do for fires. And so that entire footprint of what you see on a map that's called the Centennial Forest is the bulk of that 177,000 acres, and Wally manages them. I have the best forest manager in the world. It is a blessing. We don't have we don't have enough to really care if we have any inholdings in the Tano and the Apache sick graves or that, but I will tell you what a difference it makes and why it's as much of a concern to me as an urban resident of the Phoenix area as it should be to you, because this is your backyard. And that is, we had a very vibrant timber industry in the state of Arizona. For the same concept for why we lost those firefighters in Yarnell. It's the same management concept for our forests. If I showed you pictures of what the forests looked like in the 60s and 70s, They are not tree to tree to tree to tree. It is a canopy that is wide open so that those trees can grow. And I will tell you one other story. So how many of you have heard, is there a reporter in this room? Other than the fact that you're recording this? Okay, I'm going to tell you my version of the truth. Okay? So this is my interpretation. There's a group in Tucson called the Center for Biological Diversity. Oh, okay, so I don't have to tell you. Okay, so
I'd like to hear it, though.
you know that they sued several years ago for the protection of the spotted owl and the goshawk. Yeah, well, they keep doing it. They're going to come after me one of these days, too. That Marana actually had to buy a bunch of land, or lease a bunch of land from the state land department because of the pygmy owl, which, by the way, is no longer on the endangered species list and had a huge population in Mexico, but they wouldn't count those pygmy owls.
Just like the wolves.
Yeah, pretty much. So, Center for Biological Diversity identified the spotted owl and the goshawk as two species that had to be protected, which basically killed the forestry industry in the state of Arizona. But it also set up the Rodeo Chesky fire. One of their other aims was to control the watershed for Maricopa County, for south of here. So that's why you see SRP so concerned about the water, about the forested lands, because it's part of a healthy watershed, and that impacts the amount of water that goes into the SRP, to SRP. It is a, if you, and I don't remember the author's name, and I want to say it was in the late 70s or early 80s, but one of the best books that was ever written was by a gentleman who was a very staunch environmentalist. And he wrote a book called Playing God in Yellowstone Park. And that book details how everybody managed Yellowstone, hands off, we don't want to do anything to the trees, we don't want to do this, we don't want to do that, we want nature to rule. And nature ruled when a natural fire started and burned down Yellowstone. So the importance of the 8.5 million acres to me that's outside of the urban area is that if we don't actively manage those lands, they're not going to have any value for generations of K-12 in the future. You have to actively manage in an environment that's been impacted. These are no longer pristine wilderness areas. I don't care even if they have a wilderness title to them, they have been impacted in some way. And once they are, you have to manage them. And so every time we have a major fire up here, it's because we've not been allowed to manage the forest areas the way that's in their best interest. You'll notice, you'll see pretty soon that the Department of Forestry and Fire Management has in fact issued a contract for another management, for another Fry. Not Fry itself, because Fry didn't work.
No, $35 million
But-
for nothing.
Right. One of your own managers, one of your own elected officials in this area, David Tenney, who was on the Navajo County Board of Supervisors, is now the director of the Department of Forestry and Fire Management. And he is doing an excellent job because he understands that you have to manage your assets. You can't let them run free because they get destroyed. And so all of that habitat that Center for Biological Diversity was trying to protect for the goshawk and the spotted owl turned out to be ashes. And it also destroyed private property and homes and businesses.
And killed all the owls in the
Yeah, killed everything.
Okay, here's Tom.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Tom.
Been a long time.
It happened.
What's your feeling on biomass in the context of management, helping to manage?
I can only speak to, well, it has to be managed, otherwise it's just a fire hazard.
Yeah.
So we're working, one of the most successful biomass, and I have a different perspective than most people, because the beneficiaries are entitled to be compensated for everything that's taken off state trust land. So when Kinder Morgan comes in and gets a right-of-way to build a natural gas pipeline through southern Arizona down to Mexico, and they disturb plants on the surface, when they do that, they have to compensate the trust for the disturbance of those plants. So for me, biomass is a cleanup opportunity so that we don't have another Yarnell.
Right.
My challenge is I can't give it away. It's unconstitutional for me to give anything in the portfolio away, so I have to basically take it to auction. And if I get 25 cents for it, at least the beneficiaries have been compensated. One of the best success stories we had was in the Prescott area, where I had a company go out and do the biomass cleanup in an area. They took those wood chips, they made them into fireplace logs that had all natural product and opened up a company. That to me was heaven, because I got the land cleaned up and we started a new business. So it was an economic development opportunity. Don't tell anybody, but unfortunately they went out of business, because I guess it was too hot to go fire some Costco.
Thank you.
So yeah, so it's got to be cleaned up. It's a hazard waiting to happen.
Okay, Lana's next, and then me.
Yeah, we were up here at a meeting a couple of months ago with the Forest Service, and the head forester actually said that they're using the Abuzlman decision from New Mexico here in Arizona. which
Was that
would act-
Cal or the
Yeah.
chief forester
It was the chief forester.
from DC?
No,
It
not,
was the regional forester from Albuquerque?
yes.
Okay,
And so they've decided to go ahead and use the Abuzlman decision here.
good. It would have been nice if they would have started using it 4 or 5 years ago.
Well, in New Mexico, of course, they started using it 20 years ago.
So New Mexico and Arizona might have had their trusts done at the same time, but we have different restrictions. Like, I came home all excited after talking to my counterpart in New Mexico about 4 years ago, and they charge sportsmen for using state trust land for hunting and fishing.
Well, that's the outlaw too.
So I came home ready to charge every sportsman for even looking at state trust land. And unfortunately, I made that big pronouncement about how smart am I? I'm going to steal an idea from my buddy over in Mexico. I made that statement in front of my attorney from the Attorney General's office, and she said, before you get too excited about how brilliant you are, you can't do that in Arizona.
Well, the Forest Service has actually said, at least he said up here, that if we wanted, if the state would give them a management plan for the national forest, that we would be allowed to set the management plans. Now, that's what New Mexico's been doing on the forest lands for 20 years, based on the Abuzlman federal court ruling.
Call David Tenney. I can manage my
Can
little
you
part of
help
the
us?
world.
'Cause he's not leaving us. He was there at the meeting,
He was?
yes.
Okay, I'll call him. I'm just gonna pass along the message. I'm not getting involved. I got,
You've got a few
Can I
things
fire
to do.
some fire?
yeah, really.
Okay.
Plus my buddies in Game and Fish and state parks and now forestry look askance, because generally when they ask me for something like ADOT director wants free land for highways, you can get from point A to point B a lot faster if you just give me land. No.
Well,
So I'm not the most popular girl in the cabinet meetings because I tell everybody, no, you can't have that trail, you can't have this, you can't have that.
I think David doesn't realize that this is for real. I think that,
I would, quite honestly, I'd be very surprised, because I know he's working very closely with Hunter Moore on the governor's staff on this whole thing.
but SRP hasn't said anything about co-managing and allowing the stuff.
Yeah, I don't mean to repeat myself. I will pass along the message, but it's not in my portfolio. I have enough trouble
I'll
without
help-
getting in the middle of forestry stuff.
I'll make you a deal. I'll help you with some of that land in the Navajo Hopi relocation area if you help me. with
If
that.
I thought you could, I would take you up on that
Oh,
deal.
I can.
No, unfortunately you can't,
Why can't I?
because I have to have something in exchange and it's gotta be land.
But I think we could probably do that.
No, not according to either one of the tribes.
I have inside information with both tribes.
You and I need to chat.
Yes, we do.
I can be persuaded very easily. I'm not kidding. Whoever thought, when I was a staffer on the Hill in the mid-90s, when we did that resolution, that I would have to visit it again in my old age as a state land commissioner? I'm not real popular with either one of the tribes or Coconino County right now. That's okay. I have lots of people mad at me on a regular basis.
Okay. Many of us are very interested in the federal lands up here, and the state trust land too, because I was on the school board, so I know. Actually, just to get back to Bill, the Gila County schools get about somewhere in $300,000 that gets divided up between all the school districts every year. If the PILT is offered at a timely time, because sometimes they don't give as much. Comes out through the Department of Agriculture, I believe. So anyhow, but that's that story. So I also was at that Forest Health Symposium that Lana and Barb were at, and Brenda. And right at about that time, the Corporation Commission was looking to vote on whether the Cholla Power Plant was going to have one of their towers converted to burn biomass. And SRP was very happy, everybody was very happy, many people were very, very happy, and they voted it down right before that meeting. And they were supposed to do, 90 megawatts of power out of the biomass, because there's nothing you can do with it except making heating pellets or strand board or whatever, and there's not a company that will invest for long term, because our contracts are so short term of being able to get the timber plus do something with the biomass. So I'm on the Pace and Firewise committee also with Chris, and one of the guys that's on our committee that lives here now is from San Bernardino County, California, and he was telling us, and Coconino County now is seriously looking into it. You have these 2 semi-trucks, and on each truck is I think that it's called an air curtain burner. Have you heard of air curtain burners? Okay, so they're these big things, the air blows through, and it superheats all the stuff. So you're dumping all of this trash into the burner on one truck, and then you set it on fire, and it burns it all within 20 minutes. And then meanwhile, on the other truck, you are loading that truck. So you get 2 of these things, one for sure, 2 of these things, and they're probably, as expensive as a new fire truck or something. But how much is a new fire truck? $750,000 each?
700, 800,000.
$800,000
For a fire
each?
truck?
Yeah.
Okay, but it doesn't have as many bells and whistles. It's pretty simple. And you can move it any place you have 300 feet of open space and a road to bring all the slash from the forest, and you burn it right up, and you do all the local area, and then you go and you move the tandem team of trucks to another area. So I'm really happy they did that all up in the clearing around the San Bernardino Mountains. And so now Coconino County has heard about it. They're doing research, and I hate to reinvent the wheel, so I'm going to go and find out how much Coconino County has done. But that would be a great business investment for somebody, and we could get grants to pay for part of it, and then donations for another part of it, and move these things around and clean up the forest, because that is the biggest obstacle for forest restoration or any of the other stewardship programs.
Right.
And otherwise, they're just cutting all the stuff and burning it, and then the burn piles get kind of carried away
Right.
because there's an unpredicted gust of wind that comes on by.
Forest Service is burning the whole forest.
Yeah, so, okay, other questions? We have, any more questions? All right, well, we would like to talk to Lisa afterward too, with more questions and information.
I'm not going anywhere.
So it is 7:30, let's get done with our announcements, and then we can finish early and mingle or something. So, anyhow, well, not quite yet. Lisa Atkins, thank you so very much. And here before I lose it is your, I don't want to lose
First
that.
thing Christine will ask.
Okay, so coming up